Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to continue our read through of the Lost Cities Ancient Tombs book. And I accidentally got some Gorilla Glue on it when I was fixing something on my desk. I feel bad, but oh well, it is what it is. So tonight we're going to be reading this chapter from 1500 to 1000 BCE, Converging Worlds. So let's just dive right in, starting off with chapter 25, Hatusha's Written Records. This is from circa 1650 to 1200 BCE. It's in Anatolia and Turkey, and it is Hittite. Texts inscribed on clay tablets tell the story of the Hittites, one of the most quarrelsome empires in the ancient Middle East. Famous for their epic battle against the Egyptians in about 1275 BCE, the Hittites dominated eastern Anatolia and beyond for more than 4 centuries. Their entry onto the world stage was mysterious, as was their exit. In between, they were frequently beset by foreign enemies and confounded by dynastic conflicts. Their capital, Hatusha, was the center of the Hittites' political and religious life. Its ruins lie about 100 miles east of modern Ankara, Turkey's capital, and are often referred to by the old name of a nearby community, Boyaskoy, Turkish meaning gorge village. Oh dear, I'm sure I butchered that. Sorry, Turkish viewers. I know there's a lot of you. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I got that totally wrong. French archaeologist Charles Texier came upon the site in 1834 while searching for the lost Roman city of Tavium. Large-scale excavations began in 1906, and the ongoing work has revealed traces of a palace, administrative buildings, granaries, water reservoirs, 1-story houses of mud brick, and some 30 temples. All were surrounded by a massive wall of mud brick more than 4 miles long, with monumental stone lions, sphinxes, and gods guarding the gates. The real treasure, though, was some 30,000 clay tablets, whole and fragmentary, with texts in 8 different languages. They include diplomatic letters, trade contracts, ritual instructions, prophecies, prayers, and literature. Much of what we know about the Hittites in sporadic episodes is contained in this archive. Local people know that the Hattai first settled the site of Hatusha in about 2500 BCE. The city eventually became so important that Assyrian traders from what is now northern Iraq established their own neighborhood there. Donkey caravans conveyed precious raw materials such as gold, silver, and copper from Anatolia eastward, and returned laden with goods such as tin and textiles. The clay tablets that recorded transactions included the name of the city, Hatush. Hittites probably infiltrated the area from southern Russia and Ukraine. In about 1700 BCE, a king named Anita launched an attack on Hatush, burned down the city, and recorded this curse in the Indo-European Hittite language. At night I took the city by force. I have sown weeds in its place. Should any king after me attempt to resettle Hatush, may the storm god of heaven strike him down. Power struggles occupied the Hittite elite until finally, in about 1650 BCE, King Hattushili I was able to unify the feuding factions. Defying the historic curse, he rebuilt Hatush, which became Hatusha, with an A at the end in Hittite, and expanded his empire's territory into Syria. His son and successor, Murshili I, pushed eastward, sacking the city of Babylon some 750 miles away. But when Murshili returned home, he was murdered. In the ensuing chaos, the Hittites lost much of the territory they had just conquered. In the late 15th century BCE, the Hittites faced a number of foreign threats. Raiders known as the Kaska set Hatusha ablaze. The Ahuyawa, likely Greeks, attacked the Hittite territory of Cyprus, and the Egyptians, under Pharaoh Amenhotep III, undermined the Hittites by forging a connection with the Arzawa of western Anatolia. A new line of kings in the 14th century BCE managed to repel these enemies, shore up the empire, and rebuild Hatusha. In a testament to his empire's newly restored fortunes, King Shupiluma the First. King Shupiluma the First. One more time. King Shupiluma the First received a desperate letter from an Egyptian queen, perhaps the widow of teenage pharaoh Tutankhamun. "He who was my husband is dead, and I have no son," she wrote. "Should I then perhaps take one of my servants and make of him my husband? I have written to no other country. I've written to you. They say that you have many sons. Give me one of your sons, and he will be my husband and lord of the land of Egypt." In response, Prince Sananza was sent off to Egypt, but was murdered en route. Wow, intense. The Hittites and Egyptians came to blows in the next century at the Battle of Kadesh in modern Syria, as Ramses II sought to block the Hittites' southern expansion. Although Ramses declared victory and later took a Hittite princess as one of his many wives, neither side won decisively. A copy of their peace treaty was uncovered in the ruins of Hatusha, and a reproduction now hangs in the United Nations' headquarters in New York as one of the earliest examples of such a document. In a new burst of power in the late 13th century BCE, King Tudhaliya IV more than doubled the size of Hatusha and built a massive new wall. He successfully countered a cousin's challenge to his legitimacy, but his concern is clear in the text of an address he delivered to palace officials. "Regarding the kingship, you must acknowledge no other person but me, Tudhaliya," he said. "You must protect only His Majesty and his descendants of His Majesty. You must approach no other person." Tudhaliya's son, Shupiluliyuma II, was the last Hittite ruler of Hatusha. His time there ended when the city went up in flames again. Who were the attackers? No one knows for sure, but the Kaskans are likely suspects. Archaeologists believe the city was mostly empty by then. The royal family and their court probably fled as the enemy approached, and the ordinary folk followed. Some Hittites seem to have taken refuge in Syria, but the empire was finished. As a succession of other peoples occupied the site of Hatusha, the identity of the Hittite inhabitants faded, until their records were dug out of the city's ruins, and the history of their once great empire was resurrected. There we go. Next, chapter 26, the Ulu Burun shipwreck, circa 1320 BCE in Kaş, Turkey. It's Mediterranean. A 3,300-year-old shipwreck was with undreamed of treasures, offered a rare glimpse at how raw materials moved across the Mediterranean. The first hint of a shipwreck came in the summer of 1982, when a young sponge diver named Mehmed Shakir told his captain that he had seen strange metal biscuits with ears on the seabed while working at a depth of 150 feet near the sheer promontory called Ulu Burun on Turkey's southern coast. The captain recognized the description. Wreck hunting archaeologists from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, or the INA, of Texas A&M University had been circulating a drawing of a Bronze Age copper ingot among modern seafarers. Long experience has taught us that the best sources of information about ancient shipwrecks are the divers on Turkey's sponge boats, explained INA's founder George Bass. When divers from INA and Turkey's Museum of Underwater Archaeology in the town of Bodrum visited the site, they confirmed the existence of a wreck. They estimated that it sank during the late Bronze Age, an era marked by the reign of King Tut and the fall of Troy. At the time of its discovery, the wreck at Ulu Burun was the oldest known sunken ship in the world, and a preliminary survey proved that an astonishing amount of cargo remained intact. Beginning at a depth of 140 feet and stretching another 30 feet down a steep slope, lay a 50-foot ship with neat rows of cargo arranged just as it had been stowed 33 centuries ago. Scattered among 6 enormous storage jars were dozens of terracotta amphorae and several small two-handled jars known today as pilgrim flasks, because because their shape made them convenient to carry on long journeys. Examining all the sketches and photographs, then INA President Don Frey told his colleagues, who were looking at an archaeologist's dream. In the end, that proved an understatement. Ulu Burun held undreamed of treasures. The next summer, the team mounted a full-scale expedition led by Bass and supported by the National Geographic Society to map and excavate the site. Because of the dangerous depth, they limited the initial time on the wreck to only 5 minutes a dive, and gradually increased to 20 minutes twice a day, though that required long periods of subsequent decompression on pure oxygen. Thousands of objects were recovered over the course of 11 seasons between 1984 and 1994, in which the team logged 22,000 dives. The ship had been transporting ebony logs, ostrich eggshells, both elephant and hippopotamus ivory, bronze daggers, and amphorae full of glass beads, pigment, resin, and pomegranates. As divers began to raise one of the huge storage jars known as pithoi, they were amazed when Cypriot pottery poured from its mouth. They found a book, the first from the Bronze Age, made up of 2 ivory-hinged wooden leaves recessed to hold beeswax that could be inscribed with a stylus. Alas, the message from antiquity that might have been was not to be, for no wax survived. There were hundreds of 60-pound copper ingots, as well as ingots of pure tin, the very substance that spurred on the Bronze Age, but that is seldom found from that period in raw form. The team discovered deliberately damaged jewelry that likely belonged to a hoard of precious scrap metal to be used as payments. They found silver bracelets, gold pendants, and a well-worn gold scarab bearing the title of Nefertiti, Queen of Pharaoh Akhenaten. When one archaeologist climbed aboard to research the research vessel with news that he discovered a gold chalice in the first season of excavation, he joked, "The insurers took a pounding when the ship sank, I'll tell you that." It's true, isn't it? So amazing that all of that's on board this ship. Why this unlucky ship sank around 1320 BCE remains a mystery. Perhaps unfavorable winds drove the vessel against the rocky promontory after it left a port in Turkey. The artifacts found at the wreck came from at least 9 different cultures. Most of the cargo had Eastern Mediterranean origins, suggesting the vessel left from a port in Cyprus or the Levant and was traveling westward, perhaps destined for the Aegean, when catastrophe struck. Personal items like weapons and galleywares indicate a Canaanite crew may have operated the vessel, but other Aegean artifacts suggest some Mycenaean passengers may have been on board. At the time the Ulu Burun wreck was discovered, many scholars insisted that the Mycenaeans held a virtual monopoly on seaborne commerce during the Bronze Age, pointing to the widespread distribution of Mycenaean pottery throughout the Mediterranean. But that pottery only told half the story. It wasn't given away. Something had to have been traded in return. Bass long believed that the missing commodity was raw materials such as copper, tin, ivory, glass, and other substances that were quickly converted on arrival into tools, weapons, ornaments, and household goods. Egyptian tomb paintings depict such raw materials in the hands of Canaanite merchants delivering them to the pharaohs, but the commodities themselves are seldom, if ever, found. Only a disaster such as a shipwreck would preserve them in their original form. It was a staggering loss when this vessel, laden with precious goods and vital raw materials from around the Mediterranean and beyond, came to rest on the seabed. But the value only grew over the 3,300 years of disappearance, making the Ulu Burun wreck one of the most important windfalls in the history of underwater archaeology. Next is Letters to the Pharaohs. 1360 to 1336 BCE in Amarna, Egypt, and of course it's Egyptian. A collection of foreign correspondence inscribed on clay tablets offers rare insights into Egypt's diplomacy and power during the 18th century. Tel El Amarna, some 200 miles south of Cairo, has been called the Pompeii of Egypt. Its monuments and houses are gone, but the foundations are largely intact. No one built over its ruins, as in most ancient cities, so the site is the only place today where people can walk the streets of an ancient Egyptian city. In this dusty, long-abandoned place around 1887, locals uncovered one of the most significant caches of ancient texts yet found, diplomatic correspondence and other documents, now called the Amarna letters, that reveal Egypt's wide-range contacts abroad during a time of turmoil at home. The details of the discovery have been lost, but one widely circulated story says a local woman found strange inscribed clay tablets when she was digging up buried mud bricks to use as fertilizer. The tablets were of no use to her, and she destroyed many before selling the rest to a neighbor, who then peddled them on the antiquities market. Examples of the tablets are now scattered in museums around the world, from Istanbul to Oxford, Moscow to New York, and in private collections as well. At first, many experts failed to appreciate the importance of the tablets. At least one eminent scholar believed they were fakes. My chair's a little squeaky right now. But E.A. Wallace Budge, assistant curator at the British Museum, was able to read some of the wedge-shaped cuneiform signs that they bore. I felt certain that the tablets were both genuine and of very great historical importance, he said, after reading a passage mentioning the king of the land of Egypt. Archaeologists were later able to uncover parts of a few letters and school texts from the building where the original cache was said to have been found. Other letters came to light in nearby structures, in what was likely an administrative complex near the royal palace. Today, 382 tablets are known, most written in Akkadian, a common diplomatic language in the 14th century BCE. The survival of these fragile artifacts is due to one of the most bizarre chapters in ancient Egypt's history. Amenhotep III, a powerful pharaoh, ruled for 37 years during a golden age of empire. His connection stretched north along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea and south into Nubia, and he tapped the wealth of that great expanse to build an unprecedented series of monuments. These included elaborate constructions in the capital of Thebes, now Karnak and Luxor, the religious center of the god Amun, who soon merged with the ancient sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra. Amenhotep III's son, who came to the throne as Amenhotep IV, rejected Amun-Ra and adopted a deity called Aten, represented by the disk of the sun, as Egypt's one and only god. Whether by faith or force, Amenhotep IV turned Thebes upside down in the first 4 years of his reign, building 4 new temples to Aten around Amun's temple at Karnak. For a short time, the Egyptians believed the sun god had come back to earth in the form of the royal family, says Ray Johnson, University of Chicago Egyptologist. The whole country was in jubilee. That's amazing. Wow. Then the pharaoh did 2 things that shook his world to the core. He changed his name from Amenhotep, meaning Amun is content, to Akhenaten, glory of the sun disk. And he built a new capital called Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, the archaeological site Tel El Amarna, named for a modern village. It must have been a horrific time, says Johnson. The family that had ruled for centuries was coming to an end, and then Akhenaten went a little wacky. Akhenaten's revolution didn't last. The pharaoh was barely cold in his grave when the royal court moved back to Thebes. In time, the empty former capital crumbled, burying archives of Amenhotep III and Akhenaten in the debris. The remarkable collection of rescued letters from Amarna offers a rich and varied snapshot of international connections in the Middle East, in which Egypt was a major player. Some of these, exchanged between Egypt and its vassal states, dealt with local squabbles, a litany of accusations, complaints, conspiracies, defenses, justifications, and requests that Egypt step in to help settle a variety of issues. Other letters were sent from independent rulers to the Egyptian royals. In one, Tushratta, the king of the Mitanni, wrote to Amenhotep III's wife Tia to say, I'd asked your husband for statues of solid cast gold, but now your son has sent me plated statues of wood. With gold being dirt in your son's country, why have they been a source of such distress to your son that he has not given them to me? In another exchange, Akhenaten and the king of Alasya, now modern Cyprus, heatedly discussed the pirates who were disrupting trade and security. Akhenaten accused the foreign king of abetting sea raiders from Lucca in Anatolia. The king replied indignantly that the Lucans were raiding his own coast, and he had taken measures to punish anyone involved in the attacks. These views of the wider world, saved by a shift in politics, are important to understanding Egypt as one of the peaks of its power. Their unique insight into its international status, commerce, and diplomatic connections, as well as the desirability of raw materials such as gold, is invaluable. Without them, the historical narrative would have lost a vital external counterpoint to the country's debilitating internal chaos. What did I say? Debilitating? I don't know. Next we have Mycenaean. More than myth, circa 1600 BCE in the Peloponnesian Greece, and it's Mycenaean. When gold treasures emerged from its tombs, Mycenae, the legendary seat for power in King Agamemnon, proved to be more than lore. During the 2nd century CE, the geographer Pausanias traveled far and wide over Greece, describing its temples, tombs, and settlements, many of which were by then ancient and in ruins. In the northeastern Peloponnese, he made a stop at Mycenae, the abandoned hilltop capital of the Mycenaean civilization that dominated much of Greece from about 1600 to 1100 BCE. As the legendary home of Agamemnon, the king of Homer's epics, who launched a long campaign against Troy, Mycenae was a central location in Greece's mythological past. Its grand architecture and imposing fortifications certainly made a fitting backdrop for stories about macho warriors. Pausanias described the architectural features he saw, writing that parts of the wall are still preserved as well as the gate over which lions stand. These also, they say, are the work of the Cyclopes who built the wall for Proteus at Tiryns, another powerful Mycenaean city to the northeast. Neat. Constructed with massive and rough limestone blocks, such walls indeed seemed to be the work of mythical one-eyed giants. The walls at Tiryns are up to 26 feet thick and 43 feet high. Despite the size and importance of Mycenae, the city would disappear in the written record and in the landscape for many centuries during Pausanias' visit. It wasn't until 1841 that Greek archaeologist Kyriakos Pitakis uncovered and restored the Lion Gate, an entrance in the thick defensive wall built from monolithic stones and topped by an iconic carved stone weighing nearly 2 tons. Then in 1878, Heinrich Schliemann, in his characteristically showy style, began an excavation of the city with blockbuster results. Schliemann had a burning faith in the historical veracity of Homer, at the time when many scholars thought the epics were based on pure fantasy. Many of his contemporary Victorian scholars believed Greek society prior to the 8th century was in the Dark Ages, with minimal signs of civilization. In the early 1870s, Schliemann became world famous for excavating a mound in Turkey that seemed to correspond to the ancient city of Troy. He then received an excavation permit from the Greek government to begin digging at Mycenae in 1874. And within a few years he gave substance to Homer's description of Mycenae as rich in gold. Schliemann opened the now famous shaft graves, revealing an incredible treasure of gold objects that weighed some 44 pounds. There were death masks of unforgettable visage, the most elaborate of which reportedly moved Schliemann to cable King George I of the Hellenes. "I have gazed on the face of Agamemnon." That statement is forever associated with the dramatic archaeological discovery, even though the graves dug dated to several hundred years before the era in which the Trojan War was said to have taken place. Considering his other finds at Troy, Schliemann may be the luckiest archaeologist to have ever lived. The discovery of Mycenae was a genuine, huge archaeological achievement that opened up a whole new world for exploration of the Greek Bronze Age. Mycenae and nearby Tiryns became UNESCO World Heritage Sites in 1999. After Schliemann, archaeologists continued to study Mycenaean sites, but it would be more than a century before they would find similarly spectacular tombs. In 2015, archaeologists Jack Davis and Sharon Stalker launched an excavation at the end of the Peloponnese Peninsula at Pylos, a place Homer mentioned in the Odyssey as the site of King Nestor's palace with its lofty halls. Excavations before and after World War II had revealed remnants of a large Mycenaean palace dating to about 1300 BCE, as well as hundreds of clay tablets written in the Linear B script developed on Crete, an island about 100 miles offshore. Those texts led Michael Ventris to the translation of Linear B and confirmed the identity of Pylos. But little is known about the earlier period, around 1500 BCE, when Mycenaean society was taking shape. Archaeologists have long debated the influence of Minoan civilization, which began to flourish in Crete around 2500 BCE, on the rise of Mycenaean society 1,000 years later. Linear B tablets, bullhorn symbols, and goddess figurines found at Mycenaean sites like Pylos attest to the impact of Minoan culture. Based on archaeological evidence of destruction, many scholars believe that the Mycenaeans invaded and conquered Crete around 1450 BCE. On the first day of the dig, workers clearing a field spotted a rectangle of stones that proved to be the top of a 4-foot by 8-foot shaft. 3 feet down, the excavator spotted the first bronze artifacts. Based on their style, Davis and Stalker are confident that the remains date to about 1500 BCE. Once in the grave, the team revealed a well-preserved skeleton of the Griffin warrior, a man in his early 30s, alongside more than 1,400 objects arrayed on and around the body, including gold rings, silver cups, and an elaborate bronze sword with an ivory hilt. He was buried with a plaque depicting a creature called a griffin, with the head and wings of an eagle and the body of a lion. Also found at Pylos, a limestone encrusted gemstone the size of a thumb was cleaned and revealed to have an intricate scene of combat. The level of detail in this 3,500-year-old carving that wouldn't be seen in Greece for another millennium inspired the same awe that Schliemann felt for his mask. It's so moving to actually look at, said Stalker of the gemstone. Almost always the reaction is to cry. Next, the very, very famous tomb of a teenage pharaoh, 1322 BCE, in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. And of course, it's Egyptian. As fabulous artifacts began to emerge from his underground burial chambers, King Tut took the world by storm to become an enduring global celebrity. The world had never seen anything like it. A royal burial, untouched for 3,300 years, filled with treasures from one of history's most intriguing civilizations. The occupant, Tutankhamun Nebka-Peruri, King Tut for short, became an instant sensation. His tomb would intrigue experts and amateurs alike, rewriting the end of the 18th dynasty and inspiring endless speculation about how he died and the particulars of the place where he was laid to rest. In the late 19th century, wealthy Europeans began to explore the various royal burial grounds near the new kingdom capital of Thebes, now modern-day Karnak and Luxor, searching for stunning artifacts to fill their homes and museums. One of these was Lord Carnarvon, whose home, Highclere Castle, became famous as the setting for the television show Downton Abbey. Beginning in 1907, Carnarvon employed a fellow Brit, Howard Carter, to supervise the excavations he was finding. They had some success finding upper-class tombs and previously looted royal burials, but by the winter of 1921 to 22, they had yet to make the big score they had hoped for. Carnarvon was ready to pull the plug, but Carter convinced him to hang in for one more season of digging. It was one of the best calls in the history of archaeology. Check this out before we go further. Wow. The inside of it. I've never seen a picture of the inside of the tomb. And then this is the doorway to where his sarcophagus was. That's neat. In November 1922, Carter's workmen began clearing debris from a previously neglected triangle of ground in the Valley of the Kings, the cemetery for rulers and their relatives during the 18th and 19th dynasties. There he is. After just a few days, they hit the stone staircase that would lead them to Tut's underground grave. By the end of the month, they had come to a doorway sealed in plaster with Tutankhamun's name stamped all over it. Carter broke a small hole through the plaster, held up a candle, and looked in. What he saw would make newspaper headlines around the world. At first, I could see nothing, he wrote later, the hot air escaping from the chamber causing the candle to flicker. But presently, as my eyes became accustomed to the light, details of the room within emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, gold, everywhere the glint of gold. It would take Carter the next 10 years to catalog all of Tut's treasures. The young king had been provided with more than 5,000 things he might need in the next life. Everything from a solid gold coffin and face mask to beds and thrones, chariots and archery bows, food and wine, sandals and fresh linen underwear. Although looters had broken into the tomb at least twice in antiquity, it remains the most spectacular burial ever discovered in Egypt. And this was for a teenager with a relatively short reign. The mind boggles at the thought of the wealth that must have been buried with one of the big names. For example, the celebrated 18th dynasty Queen Nefertiti. The young pharaoh ruled at a time when Egypt had become fabulously rich and powerful. The country had prospered for more than 1,000 years, keeping traditions that had arisen even before the now famous pyramids at Giza were built. By Tut's time, Egypt had gained access to the legendary gold mines of Nubia to the south and had conquered territory along the Mediterranean coast to the northeast. But the country was in turmoil when Tut took the throne. A pharaoh named Akhenaten, possibly Tut's father or half-brother, had turned traditions upside down by ordering everyone to worship the sun god Aten, smashing statues of other gods and moving the capital to a new location. It's unclear who became pharaoh right after Akhenaten died, but Tutankhamun soon rose to the throne. He was only 9 years old, which must have set his subjects to worrying all over again. A boy king, how could he rule a whole country? And how could he ever hope to protect Egypt from its enemies? His top officials, though, offered him wise advice and worked diligently to set Egypt right. For starters, that meant moving the capital back to Thebes. During his decade-long reign, Tut became a symbol of this restoration, a return to Maat, the proper order of things. Then, stunningly, the teenage ruler died. The cause is uncertain. Maybe a lethal infection set in after he broke his leg in an accident, or perhaps malaria did him in. Or he had a fatal genetic weakness that arose from the royals' habit of marrying their siblings. However it came about, Tut's passing created an immediate practical problem. There was no finished tomb to put him in. No one could have imagined that someone so young would drop dead. Egypt's officials must have thought they had plenty of time to prepare his place of eternal rest, and then suddenly time ran out. Many experts think Tut was buried in a tomb that had already been prepared for someone else, a quick and easy solution. In time, as other tombs were carved into the valley's cliffs, rocky debris covered the entrance to Tut's chambers, and the location was forgotten. Also, the record of Tut himself all but disappeared. Because he was so closely associated with the horrors of the Akhenaten era, his name, along with others, was stricken from the official list of kings. With the discovery of his final resting place, his life story had been revived, and his tomb has become famous as KV62, the 62nd discovery in the Valley of the Kings. But what if KV62 was already occupied? Tut was buried in a few small rooms near the entrance. Maybe the first occupant is lying in larger rooms beyond Tut's modest suite. And if it's Nefertiti, or a royal of the same stature, the rooms might be filled with great treasures, all untouched by looters. A series of investigations in recent years, using technology such as ground-penetrating radar, has sought to discover whether any adjacent chambers exist. Results have been tantalizingly inconclusive. Maybe yes, maybe no, and the intrigue continues, along with the hope that something amazing is awaiting discovery. I like that. Meanwhile, Egypt has constructed the billion-dollar Grand Egyptian Museum, known as the Gem, where King Tut's funerary artifacts are now exhibited as never before. For decades, the teen's possessions were housed in the Egyptian Museum in downtown Cairo near historic Tahrir Square. But that building, which opened in 1902, had space to present only the most stunning pieces: chariots, nested funerary shrines, fabulous jewelry. The new facility, overlooking the grandeur of the Giza pyramids, was designed to display together for the first time all the goods meant for Tut's use in the next world. 2 large galleries showcase the pharaoh's personal effects in a way that evokes the treasure-packed chambers of his tomb. The names of all but a few ancient Egyptians are long forgotten. Although each hoped for eternal life after death, the memory of them as individuals here on Earth has mostly faded away. King Tut is the fantastic exception. Not only does his name live on, but his fame, in all its overblown rock star dimensions, has taken on a life of its own, resurging with every new exhibit, every rumor of another long-forgotten tomb in the Valley of the Kings. I really liked that. That was really well written. That made me excited. Next we have the Legend of Troy, 1180 BCE in Hisarlik, Turkey. It's Anatolian and Greek. In the early days of archaeology, an eccentric German businessman proved the besieged city of Homer's Iliad was indeed a real place. Here comes Heinrich again. Yep. Heinrich Schliemann was a German businessman who amassed a huge fortune as a merchant in the 19th century. In the grand tradition of millionaires who sink their money into ambitious, if quixotic quests, Schliemann began chasing a dream he later claimed to have had since boyhood. He wanted to find and excavate Troy, the lost ancient city whose walls defined a decade-long siege by a Greek army led by Agamemnon, only to fall by a cunning false retreat strategy and to open their gates for a wooden horse concealing Greek warriors. Thanks to Greek myth and Homer's 8th century BCE epic poems, history preserved the tale of the beautiful Queen Helen of Sparta, whose abduction by Paris instigated the war. Meddlesome gods who chose sides. And dramatic duels that immortalized Ajax, Hector, Ulysses, and Achilles. But looking for Troy's material remains in Schliemann's day may have been like looking for Atlantis today. Scholars weren't sure if a real city, like the one described in the Iliad, had existed, or if a conflict like the Trojan War had really taken place. Nevertheless, Schliemann fashioned himself into an amateur archaeologist and launched his search. In 1870, he began an excavation at Hisarlik, a 100-foot high artificial mound in the plains of northwestern Turkey overlooking the Aegean coast and not far from the entrance of the Dardanelles Strait. British diplomat Frank Calvert had already made some promising trial excavations of the mound in the 1860s. But Schliemann's energetic digging unearthed a veritable city. In fact, he unearthed many cities. Troy had fallen into ruins and had been rebuilt and renovated many times during its 4,000 years of history, and there were at least 9 distinct layers of occupation beginning around 2700 BCE. Schliemann was working at a time when archaeology was in its infancy, and much to the annoyance of modern practitioners, he dug straight through many of these layers with hardly the level of care and documentation required today. According to one version of the events, digging was progressing on a May morning in 1873 in one of the lowest levels of the city, known as Troy II. Schliemann dismissed his workmen for an early break when he saw a glint of gold behind a large copper object emerging next to one of the walls of a building believed to be the palace of Priam, legendary king of Troy. Schliemann continued digging himself and later recounted, "I cut out the treasure with a large knife. It was impossible to do this without the most strenuous exertions and the most fearful risk to my life, for the large fortification wall, which I had to undermine, threatened at every moment to fall down on me. But the sight of so many objects, each one which is of inestimable value for science, inestimable, I like that, made me foolhardy, and I had no thought of danger." He claimed his wife, Sophia, who often dug alongside him, stood by ready to carry away in her shawl the objects he cut out. Wow, that's Sophia wearing a diadem that he found in Troy. Wow. I thought it was going to be like a depiction of Helen or something, but that's really cool. Right. Any treasures he cut out. Schliemann imagined he was looking at a hoard of valuables hastily packed by a member of Priam's family while their palace was under attack. Priam's treasure contained battle axes and daggers, vases, cups, and dishes made of precious metals, including a gold sauceboat and an astonishing haul of jewelry, including 2 gold diadems, 60 earrings, and thousands of beads, buttons, and other ornaments. Schliemann smuggled the objects out of Turkey into his residence in Athens. There Sophia was photographed wearing the exquisite jewelry. The iconic portrait helped make the discovery famous and helped kick off a legal battle with the Turkish authorities. Even in his day, Schliemann was a controversial figure, ridiculed for his self-promotion, exaggeration, and eagerness to associate his finds with figures from myth. Noting various inconsistencies in his accounts of the discovery, many scholars now question whether all the items of the treasure were found together at all. They suspect Schliemann may have arranged a composite hoard with older finds, or even purchases to maximize publicity. Sophia wasn't even present at the dig during the supposed discovery, and in any case, archaeologists now know that these objects and the adjacent building were far older than the Homeric era. Troy too actually dates from 2500 to 2300 BCE. Schliemann and his workmen dug past the destroyed city that archaeologists later believed better corresponded to the period of the legendary Trojan War. Troy 6 dating from 1700 to 1250 BCE. They threw stones of the palatial building and probably related artifacts from that era into a spoil heap. Despite Schliemann's mixed legacy, the importance of Hisarlik as an archaeological site was undeniable. After Schliemann died in 1890, his assistant Wilhelm Dorpfeld took over excavations and better documented the features of Troy 6, including its massive walls. In the 1930s, archaeologist Carl Blechen proposed that Troy 6 was not destroyed by the blaze of warfare, but by an earthquake, and that wartime destruction was more apparent in Troy 7. After a lapse of 50 years, new work began at Troy in the late 1980s under archaeologist Manfred Korfmann of Germany's University of Tübingen. Some doubted there would be much left to find at the site in the wake of Schliemann. One lingering argument against Hisarlik as Troy was that the city seemed too small to be worth a decade-long battle, but Korfmann and his colleagues found an impressive U-shaped ditch that surrounded the city in the late Bronze Age. Inside, the archaeologists discovered an entire lower portion of the city that hadn't been detected before. Troy was actually 15 times bigger than previously thought. Counteracting the biases of previous excavators like Schliemann, who were based in Greece, the new crop of researchers also showed that Troy actually had more connections to Anatolia than the Aegean. The city was part of the kingdom of Wilusa, also mentioned in Hittite and Egyptian sources. Korfmann's research pinpointed Troy's violent attack to 1180 BCE. By Homer's day, the city was in ruins, but Greeks were reoccupying the city and calling it Ilion. Over the next several centuries, visitors would come from all over the Mediterranean and beyond to see the fabled city for themselves. Alexander the Great and the Persian ruler Xerxes supposedly made appearances. But did the legendary war that drew them to the western shores of Turkey really occur? Korfman thought it was likely that several armed conflicts occurred in and around Troy at the end of the late Bronze Age. Maybe it would be impossible to ever know whether one of these fights could be attributed to the Trojan War of myth, or if Homer distilled them into one conflict. One thing Homer understood with certainty is human nature, the lengths people will take to immortalize their name and leave a legacy, whether by waging war across the sea or searching for the stones of a lost city. He asks in the Iliad, "Who in future story will speak well of you?" Next we have rediscovering the Shang. This is 1600 to 1045 BCE in Anyang, Hainan province in China. It's part of the Shang dynasty. Thousands of so-called oracle bones proved conclusively that the Shang dynasty wasn't a fable, but a Bronze Age civilization with a rich cultural tradition. The fabled Shang dynasty, known for its cultural and scientific advances, ruled China from 1600 to circa 1045 BCE. Some scholars had dismissed it as mythical until traces of the Shang began to reappear in the Yellow River Plain after more than 3,000 years. The rediscovery began in 1899 in the city of Anyang, located in Hainan province, when a man named Wan Yirong came down with a case of malaria. The story goes that he went to a pharmacist for help and was given dragon bones, an important ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine, which were actually turtle shells. Before the shells could be ground up, a family member noticed that they were inscribed with strange characters. To average citizens, they were at first glance unintelligible, but Wang, the chancellor of the Imperial Academy and an expert on ancient Chinese texts, believed them to be an early form of Chinese script. The malaria tale is likely apocryphal, but Wang did become the first major collector of what scholars came to call oracle bones, the turtle shells and cattle scapulae the Shang once used for divination. Whoa, there's the oracle bones there. Oh, that's neat. Okay. Let me keep the cat from snoring. Oh my God. Okay. The collection soon came into the possession of Lu Yi, who published the first catalogue of the inscriptions in 1903. The shells and bones had been cleaned and treated, then thinned by drilling notches into the back. The diviner would inscribe them with yes or no questions, so when a hot object was applied to the surface until it cracked, the cryptic fissures could be read like a palm reader reads hands. Occasionally an inscription would include a prediction, for example, Lady Howe's childbearing will be good, and courtiers would later record whether the prediction held true. One memorable epilogue reads, "After 31 days, Lady Howe gave birth. It was not good. It was a girl." But their secrets weren't revealed until after the Qing dynasty fell in 1911, when intellectuals began calling for the country to embrace Western science and philosophy. Realizing that archaeology could provide a fresh perspective on the past, the newly established Academia Sinica, China's National Research Institute, sent an excavation team led by Li Qi to Zhaotun in 1928. The earliest digs, which followed in the tracks of looters and dealers, focused on retrieving oracle bones. Over 15 seasons in the 1920s and early 1930s, as more than 100,000 were discovered, the Shang dynasty officially became a historical reality. These deceptively simple objects not only possessed the power to authenticate the past, but they also constituted the first archaeological evidence of an ancient indigenous civilization. The bones' inscriptions bear testament to the development of one of the world's oldest systems of writing, as well as a sophisticated belief and social system. They reveal much about the Shang, from wars and harvests to births and deaths. There are even comments on the toothaches of kings. They are heavy with descriptions of sacrifices, both human and animal. Foreign tribes can be allies or enemies. Statements are brief and to the point, and yet some inscriptions ring across the centuries with haunting beauty and mystery. In the afternoon, a rainbow also came out of the north and drank in the Yellow River. The bones also reference figures who appear in traditional historical texts. demonstrating that the ancient tales were more than myth. Wu Ding, the 21st Shang king who presided over the dynasty at its zenith, is mentioned frequently, as is his queen consort Fu Hao. All told, the oracle bones found at Jiaotun document more than 150 years at the end of the Shang era, from around 1200 to 1045 BCE. In 1937, as the Japanese invasion of China pressed inland, the Academia Sinica was forced to abandon its Jiaotun excavations. With the advent of the Cultural Revolution in 1966, the search for the Shang all but ended. In 1975, national propaganda campaigns were demanding that local villages flatten hilly terrain to improve farming. "We don't want the ancient sites to get plowed over," said Zhang Zhenjiang, an archaeologist at Anyang who resisted the government's petitions to enact his plan at Jiaotun. So we did test excavations first. Under one hill they made a massive discovery, the tomb of Queen Consort and military general Fu Hao, and the first unlooted Shang burial chamber ever found by archaeologists. Unfortunately, Zhang and his team were hamstrung by limited resources and political turmoil. "We should have used pumps and wells to drain the site," he said, "but we couldn't afford it." So in 1976, locals drove into freezing mud to pull out relics from the tomb site at Jiaotun. That's awesome. That's a wine vessel, it says. "They drank shots of grain alcohol beforehand because it was so cold," Zhang observed. "Their discomfort paid off. Shang's team found treasures made of jade, ivory, and bone, as well 195 bronze vessels, which outside of oracle bones are the most distinctive relics of Shang culture. With each Shang relic uncovered, researchers paint an ever clearer picture of this once mysterious dynasty. Just as the Shang were divining the will of their ancestors, we're doing the same thing," says the University of California's David N. Knightley, an expert on oracle bones. "We're engaged in a kind of academic divination." Next is armies clash at the causeway. Circa 1250 BCE in the Tolens Valley in Germany, it's part of the Bronze Age. The remains of hundreds of warriors killed in battle along Germany's Tolens River dispel the notion of a peaceful Bronze Age in northern Europe. The meandering Tolens River, I hope I'm saying that right, Tolens River, flows gently through the rolling landscape of the North German plain near the Baltic Sea. This idyllic image of this tranquil river valley near the town of Wiltzen was forever shattered in 1996, when a single upper arm bone was discovered sticking out of the riverbank, with a flint arrowhead embedded in the shoulder. A wooden club lay nearby. As archaeologists excavated along and beneath the river, they uncovered thousands of bones, many closely packed together, that dated to the late Bronze Age, around 1250 BCE. Had this been a cemetery that flooded? As they examined the bones more closely, they found gruesome evidence of combat, skulls pierced by arrowheads, stab marks on rib cages. The sheer scale and violence of the scene made it clear the Tolens Valley was Europe's oldest battlefield. Scholars throughout the 20th century had thought that the Bronze Age in northern Europe was a relatively peaceful and uneventful time period. The region seemed a stark contrast to the more advanced civilizations in Greece and the Near East, which at the time were engaged in the Trojan War and campaigns by such warrior kings as Ramses II. There were scant historical accounts of conflict in northern Europe. Bronze weapons unearthed from the time period were found in ceremonial burials. The excavations at Tolens turned those notions upside down, for such an immense battle required far more organization and wrought far greater violence than had ever been imagined in the region at the time. In the 25 years since the initial discovery at Tolens, scientists have used metal detectors and scuba diving equipment in addition to their usual excavation techniques to uncover nearly 12,000 pieces of human bone and other intriguing artifacts along a 1.5-mile-long stretch of the river. They've identified more than 140 individuals, mostly men between the ages of 20 and 40, and estimate 2,000 to 4,000 combatants likely participated in the battle. What might have provoked such a large-scale engagement? Geomagnetic scans revealed that an approximately 400-foot-long stone-flanked wooden causeway had traversed the valley from east to west. Radiocarbon dating pegged parts of the structure to more than 500 years before the battle, with other parts updated in the centuries that followed. Scientists suspect that the causeway might have long served as an important crossroads along a trade route, and was likely a recognized and highly prized landmark. Researchers theorize that the conflict started at the causeway. The armies advanced along both sides of the river, fighting hand-to-hand with clubs, spears, swords, and knives. Archers fired diamond-shaped bronze arrowheads, leaving telltale scars on their victims. Some higher-ranking warriors rode on horseback. The bones of 5 small horses have been discovered on site. Combatants were killed as they moved downriver, leaving their bones and belongings behind. None of the bodies showed healed wounds, which means the battle was brief, perhaps a few days at most. In the sediment of the river, scientists found several gold rings, which most likely were worn in the hair of a powerful person present at the battle. A cache of artifacts near the causeway included several tools, a round star-ornamented belt box, and fragments of copper that might have been used as a form of currency. Bronze cylinders may have been fittings for bags or boxes designed to hold personal gear, objects that until now have only been discovered hundreds of miles away. These artifacts lead credence to the theory that this massive battle wasn't just a local conflict, but drew combatants from long distances. They reinforce an earlier chemical analysis of teeth found on the battlefield that concluded there were 2 groups of fighters. One group of northern German locals and another more diverse group from somewhere in Central Europe. It was a surprise to find a battlefield site, archaeologist Thomas Terberger told Smithsonian Magazine. It was a second surprise to see a battlefield site of this dimension with so many warriors involved, and now it's a big surprise that we are dealing with a conflict of a European scale. This is a bunch of bones found in the river. It's a little gruesome. Historians hope further excavations will reveal the motivation that led these men so far from home, what caused the conflict at the causeway that sparked their final battle. And I think this is the last one. Let me double check. Pretty sure, yeah, okay. A settlement left in haste, circa 1000 to 800 BCE in Cambridgeshire in the UK, and it's just prehistoric. The remains of Must Farm, abandoned after a catastrophic fire, offer an extraordinary snapshot of daily life 3,000 years ago. In the late Bronze Age, fire swept through a small settlement perched at the edge of a now-vanished tributary of the river Nen? Nini? I'm not sure. Let's go for Nen. Roof beams collapsed. Blazing thatch and walls of wattle fell, and wicker floors crashed onto the marshy ground, along with the charred household items that had sat on them. Silt quickly covered the ruins, preserving everything just as it had landed. The evidence of that single event, uncovered at a site called Must Farm, has offered an unprecedented look at ordinary life in the ancient fens of Cambridgeshire. So much has been preserved, we can actually see everyday life during the Bronze Age in the round. It's prehistoric archaeology in 3D, archaeologist David Gibson told the BBC. In modern times, until about 140 years ago, this part of eastern England mainly produced crops and cattle. But when Victorian-era building generated a demand for bricks, a quarry opened to mine a deposit of exceptionally fine clay. The quarrying continues to this day. In the summer of 1999, an archaeologist spotted timbers uncovered at the edge of an extraction pit. Initial investigations revealed promising clues: potsherds, worked flint, textiles, which led to 10 months of excavation beginning in August 2015. Digging through muck in all kinds of weather, archaeologists slowly exposed the remains of the most complete, best-preserved Bronze Age settlement ever discovered in Britain. At least 5 buildings, 4 round and 1 trapezoidal, were connected by a raised walkway inside a wooden palisade. Each building measured about 25 feet in diameter and stood on stilts above a broad, slow-moving river. Judging from the quantity and quality of artifacts recovered, this was a prosperous, well-connected settlement. Perhaps located on the waterway to control trade and drawing resources from cultivated areas on dry land nearby. It was probably less than a year old when disaster struck. The oak house beams and ash palisade posts were still green, and thousands of wood chips and other construction debris littered the ground. According to the University of Cambridge, whose archaeologists conducted the excavation, the site has revealed the largest collections in Britain of Bronze Age textiles, beads, domestic wooden artifacts including buckets, platters, troughs, shafts, and handles, and domestic metalwork like axes, sickles, hammers, spears, gouges, razors, knives, and awls. It has also yielded a wide range of household items. Among them are several complete sets of storage jars, cups, and bowls. Charring from the fire and the wet environment that the houses and their contents fell into preserved organic items stunningly well. Archaeologists even found the remains of meals in pots and bowls, one of which held a wooden spoon, maybe left mid-meal as the fire closed in. The diet included stews of vegetables, ember wheat, and barley. Think porridge, and add a few extra herby things. If you were lucky, you might have had honey to dollop in the middle, said University of Oxford archaeologist Chris Gosden. It isn't a great meal, and if someone put a bowl in front of you, you wouldn't light up. Meats are also on the menu. Wild game such as deer and boar, domesticated lambs and calves, and the occasional freshwater fish such as pike and carp. Let's see. Oh, it's a wheel. Interesting. The people who lived here were not only excellent carpenters, but skilled in textile arts as well. Plant fibers included cultivated flax and wild nettle. Threads wound into balls or round sticks have survived, along with finely woven fabrics, some with strands as thin as human hairs. In the silt of the ancient river channel near the largest round house, archaeologists uncovered yet another surprise. A wooden wheel, 3 feet in diameter, the largest and earliest complete example ever found in Britain. Its wood was scorched in a way that suggests it was close to, but not in, the big fire. Experts believe the wheel was part of a cart that could have held 2 people. Its discovery demonstrates the inhabitants of this watery landscape's links to the dry land beyond the river, said archaeologist David Gibson. The skeleton of a horse, a rare animal during this period, was found close by, perhaps the remains of the very creature that once pulled the cart. The wealth of evidence uncovered at Must Farm reveals both intimate moments close to home and connections farther afield. Footprints trod into wet silt include those of sheep and cow hooves, as well as a size 10 human foot, left as the owner went about his daily chores. But this riverside community was no backwater. A wide-reaching trade network brought in, for example, a necklace of blue glass, amber, and jet beads that had been created in the Balkans and the Middle East. What caused the fire that destroyed this place and prompted residents to leave? It could have been a ritual destruction, which was not uncommon during this period. One expert believes the fire started outside. In that case, jealous neighbors may have set houses alight in an attack, or sparks may have accidentally scattered onto a roof's dry thatch. But we may never know for sure. As artifacts continued to emerge from the mud, the time allotted for the excavation was extended twice. Eventually, though, the quarry reclaimed the site. The excavation area was reburied, and a road was built on top. Although plans move ahead to display pieces at a museum in neighboring Peterborough, the collection is currently in the hands of researchers and conservators. Work will surely continue for years to come, building the most detailed picture of life in the Bronze Age Britain that has ever been possible. That's going to be the end. Oh, next we're going to Persepolis. That's exciting. Alright, that's the end for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.